There's no shortcuts. A shortcut is a dead end to a place you don't want to be in the first place. So take the hard road and set a high bar for yourself and your impact.
Eric Jorgenson is a writer, entrepreneur, and investor. His first book was all around Naval Ravikant. It was a guide to wealth and happiness. As well as this, his second book is all around the Anthology of Balaji. Balaji is an American entrepreneur and investor. He was the co-founder of Counsyl, the former CTO of Coinbase, and is also a managing partner at Andreessen Horowitz. This podcast gets into the detail of his new book, The Anthology of Balaji. What's up, people? Before we get into this video, please make sure to subscribe, like, and comment down below so we can get bigger and better guests for you every single week. Let's get straight into the video right now. All right, man. Let's kick off. So today we're going to be going into all the details of the new book, which I'm really excited for, right? So the Anthology of Balaji, a guide to technology, trust, and building the future. So it's interesting because, of course, like your first book on Naval into right now, it's like two books on different people, both people that are alive, you're documenting their story. So it's a very like unique style to begin with, right? But I wanted to start with a quote from the book that I pulled out, there's a lot of good quotes in there, right? The execution mindset means doing the next thing on your to-do list at all times. Rewrite the list every day or every week in response to progress. This is easy to say, but extremely hard to do. It means saying no to other people, saying no to distractions, saying no to fun, and exerting all of your waking hours on a task at hand. So, how much significance has that had on you in writing the book and analyzing biology during this process?
Yeah, it's so fun to get to apply the lessons of the book as you're doing it. And that happened with the Naval book, that happened with the Balaji book. It is happening currently with the next book that I'm writing. And that's one that is put so simply that you're like, oh yeah, like there's all the productivity gurus, all the
Yeah.
like tools, all the checklists. It's like it doesn't have to be any simpler or any more complicated than just like a note card and your to-do list and hammering the list and constantly being willing to reprioritize based on what's happening around you. And that's that feedback loop of getting reoriented can be tricky to know like how often to do it. And the answer is like as quickly and as often as you possibly can, right? Like you have to reorient based on what's happening. And the faster you do it and the faster you respond, the more effective your next to do is going to be.
So when you were going through this book or even these pieces, I'd love to know, like, what was there any element that you actually disagreed with, or something that you looked at,
Mm.
even you documented that you had previously even didn't agree with, and change your perspective over time?
Yeah, there's a lot. This book, maybe more so even than Naval. There was stuff that I probably disagreed with it. It's certainly in Balaji's like work.
Yeah.
Probably less so as I like curated what sort of went into the final book, but definitely there's some stuff. There's plenty that even whether you agree with it or not, I'm just kind of like, oh, I'm willing to like suspend disbelief on this and be like, well, let me see. Like, let's see. I'm open to that being a possible future, or maybe that's more true than I thought it was. There's a lot that I mean, Balaji is extremely opinionated, right? Like, and he's got like I think Mark Andreessen said about him, which Balaji worked at A16Z for a while, like with Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, and so they know each other well. And Andreessen said, when Balaji's wrong, it's because he over extrapolates. He takes an idea to 11 when actually like reality stops it at 5. And I think that's a really helppful lens to sort of put on some of these really extreme or far out predictions or things that seem crazy is like, he's just seeing farther. He's willing to extrapolate further than most people have ever considered before. And that's just a really interesting thought exercise, whether or not you take it at sort of at face value, or you're like, oh yes, I believe that is going to happen too. It's just an interesting perspective to see.
And also for people who have not been thinking in that way, I think it's wrong to shut down those ideas. So that's kind of the way I was looking at some of the different elements, because like it's just not focal for me. If you ever read the book Persuasion, the main overarching element is what focal is causal. So if I kept on telling you that you had a problem with the book, over time you'd be like, oh, there's a problem with the book, and you try to fix it. So it's a fact that I think for a lot of people, they might read some elements of his work and think, oh, in isolation, this has no relevance to me. But I think it's more important when someone like Balaji is so focused on expanding human lifespan or improving like information diet, that at that point you
Yeah.
think, okay, this guy has done so much research that I shouldn't shut down the idea. I should be open to the perspective in the very least of things.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think if there's one, like my focus on this book is really like at the most fundamental idea that I want people to take away is just a deep respect and appreciation for the value of technology. Like
Yeah.
it's the first chapter in the book, it's the first section, it's the first line of the subtitle. Like that to me, I always thought technology was cool. Like thought it was awesome and like got excited by it, like a Star Wars nerd and stuff like that. But like the Balaji's lays out so simply in this book, like how critical it is, like the foundation of all good things for humanity. The fact that we're not like hunting, gathering, and like worried that somebody's going to stab us in our sleep all comes down to the progress of technology and having a respect for that and appreciation for it, working on it, seeking it out, investing in it, and just like the moral obligation to respect, appreciate, and invest in technology feels so obvious to me in life after writing this book. And I hope it's obvious to people after reading it.
Of course, and a big aspect he discusses in the area of like value. So
Mm.
value is like can be intangible. It's difficult to put a number on it. That's why some people come up
Yeah.
and say, my hourly rate is $5,000, and you're like, oh, but you're a human, but you can't do this. And he references value in terms of technology, and well, from multiple different lenses, but one in particular in the fact that it can speed up our output, especially your outcomes. So if you're
Yes.
writing this book, if you had a prompt that would help you, or if you had a way to revise your editions, that increases the value from it. And there's definitely been elements in time where people say no to technology or just say no to the next thing that can help them. But I think that's where someone like yourself, of course, as an investor, and someone like Balaji who has that forward thinking to be looking to reinvent themselves. Do you find that kind of be a blocker, or maybe like an element that people will disagree with to some degree?
It's even if you agree with it sort of conceptually, I think it's hard. Most people are going to say like, well, technology doesn't make our lives better. But
Mhm.
broadly, right? Like there's an issue where people kind of hear tech now and just think like, oh, Amazon, Apple, Google, like Facebook, it's software, right? Like tech is those set
Mhm.
of companies. And no, technology is just like the frontier of new capabilities for humanity, right? Like we have always had technology, just what is at that frontier has changed over time. And uh, to appreciate technology is not to say it's easy to do, right? Like there's always friction in bringing something new into your life, of learning a new skill, of going to buy chat gpt and figuring out how the hell to write some new prompts and how it can be useful in your life or your business. And I'm not by nature one of the people who's like, oh cool, a new tool, like let me tinker, let me play with it, like let me go do that. This has made me more eager to go do that, I think, and
Mhm.
more excited about what's on the other side of that work. Because it's work to go learn a new thing, suss it out, find out if it's real, dive into it, figure out how to apply it, figure out all the use cases of it. But seeing what's on the other side of it makes me more eager to do it in life, in business. Like I was arguing, arguing. I was on Twitter the other day having a conversation with somebody about the trilemma, the like something can be faster, better, or cheaper, but like not
Yeah.
all three at once.
Mhm.
And he's like, if someone has something, they're trying to sell you something that's faster and better and cheaper, like they're lying to you, run away. And I was like, man, that's like the efficient market hypothesis for operations. Like I can't, that's to say nothing has
Mhm.
ever gotten better over time. And the whole story of technology is things getting faster and better and cheaper at the same time. And I can show you
Yeah.
all these examples through history of things getting all like faster, better, and cheaper constantly. The
Mhm.
equilibrium is always moving. So if you want to offer something that's better than your competitors for less and do execute your things faster, like the answer lies in technology, and you have to go do the
Mhm.
work to find the technology that can enable a better product or a better service, and find a way to improve, like fold it into your service, um, fold it into your products. There's a lot of good that can come from it, but it's a different kind of work than like, oh, grind it out, like
Yeah.
lift harder, work more hours. Like it's working smarter, and that's not always easy, you know.
Yeah. And the funny part is like he mentions the tech industry, right? And we all think like tech
Yeah.
industry is just, raise a shit out of capital, build a platform, hemorrhage losses for 6 years, and then try to turn profitable. But his reference, which I completely agree with, is the fact that like everything is tech. So I run a service business. We run a media company, right? We use technology, combination of Slack, Google Drive, YouTube, video files, compressors, all this stuff, right? So it's a tech company that obviously does
Hmm.
media things, right? So for instance, you mentioned there about the cost. The cost of experimentation is so low these days that there's pretty much that is the opportunity cost that you should be experimenting, because it's not like a biomedical field,
Yes.
a genome experiment whereby we have to test a
Yeah.
million data sets and have no idea how to view into it. So it's kind of like having that open perspective, which is exactly what comes from his idea. But the idea overall is to eliminate scarcity that he's explaining, or eliminate mortality at a more extreme level. Can you give me a bit more thought process on that in terms of like how we attach like mortality, like, and to eliminate mortality with technology? All right, people, we're just going to take one short little break for a little update about Podcast University. So if you enjoy podcasts like this and you want to start your own podcast, head down to the links down below to Podcast University. This is a learning platform that I've built to help people like you build, launch, and scale your own podcast. I wasted many years doing this, making it all up as I go. So I put everything together in a very seamless and easy to follow course for you guys to follow and just learn exactly how to do it. So if you want to bypass a lot of the mess with your podcast, check out the links down below to Podcast University, and it will show you exactly how to launch and scale your own podcast.
Yeah, that one's probably, I forget, it comes in the first kind of two chapters or something like that, pretty early, and it's one of those ideas where you kind of like, you're like, did I read that right? And then you put the book down and like look out the window, and then you're like, I think he said what I think he said. Okay, let me like, this is pushing my brain farther than I thought. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
his the theory is basically everything that we want or work to get costs us some of our life, whether it's the time invested in getting it, or whether it is, we spend our time to earn money and we spend that money on something
Mm-hmm.
that we want. And so the theory is like, if we can extend lives, or i- for some period of time or indefinitely, you're changing the denominator of that. You're changing the cost of everything you ever consume by giving us more currency. And that is a very interesting it's a very interesting take. We're
Mm-hmm.
obviously a long ways from indefinite physical life, but there's a lot of progress that can get made. And I think a really interesting thing that he points out that's adjacent to this is like, we used to care a lot about extending lifespan, like pushing the human lifespan longer used to be the single, like, most key metric of technological progress. And that has kind of stopped happening. Not just stopped happening, but like, we have gone, our lifespan has decreased in a lot of areas, a lot of geographies, which is insane. Um, and I don't know if it's technology taking its eye off the ball, or sort of regulatory capture that's happening in different places, or, just we got too comfortable. Like, there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of interesting potential explanations, but it's a reminder, I think, and he lists a lot of potential technologies that show us this, that doesn't have to be the case. Like, we did not run up against a law of physics that stopped us from continuing to improve human lifespan. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of technologies laying around that could continue to make our lives better, and a lot of people have just, I don't know, lost focus, lost motivation, lost interest, which is, again, something I hope we put a dent in with this book.
And it's funny because it goes back to the kind of government intervention and the regulation around it. So it's like okay, the medical
Hmm.
field is highly regulated, highly regulated. The financial industry is highly regulated for good reasons, right? Because you don't want collapses of the financial system, uh, because it's happened in the past. However, that seeped into like all different aspects. It's like AI exploration. We also need now AI regulation to stop any sort of expiration. So that rate of discovery of new technologies or advancing technology or advancing human lifespan is being
Yeah.
limited by these extra factors. And I thought there was an interesting link between Balaji's like anti-establishment view and his early childhood, which is like him in
Hmm.
school, whatever, and then his views on like regulation, which kind of seeps into crypto, seeps into everything. Like it seems that like these people who are, futurists or alternative thinkers, they've always had that anti-establishment view because
Yeah.
it blocks anything that was going to advance human lifespan or whatever.
Yeah. I don't think Balaji talks about this as much in his work as he maybe should. Um,
Mhm.
because it comes off, he spends sort of like 80% of the time on like here's what's wrong with the government, and 20% of the time on but here's what we could do if we change the government. And I kind of tried to flip that in this book and be like, here's all the good stuff, here's all the potential that's being held back by that thing over there, but I'm not going to spend too much time on, you know, railing against the government or the establishments or anything like that. But I want to just like show people what's on the other side of that. And in his really, this is his foundation of why he wants to go start new countries, why he wants network states, why he wants to reform the FDA. Like it's not, it's not just like because the man or because like the system needs to change. It's because he believes that there's technology there that can let us live healthfully to 110, 120. And because of the context of institutions that we live in, we don't even have the chance to try it. We've
Mm.
sort of stamped out that innovative roots of America where people were, building planes in their backyard or building bridges, building skyscrapers, like, and it was risky, like people died, like a lot of them,
Yep. They were
in
sniffing the chemicals to test
building
it.
railroads, sniffing chemicals, yeah, building like, the Wright brothers, just like building planes. There's probably plenty of people trying to build their own planes that didn't go nearly as well, right? Like,
Hmm.
but that we have to be willing to take some of those risks as a society and as individuals. He points out that we take risks all the time, but there's all these different cases where it's illegal to take risks with our own body, with our own health, to try out,
Mm.
new cutting edge drugs, even if we're sick, even with terminal illnesses. There's people, that cases that have gone to the Supreme Court of people with terminal illnesses saying there's an experimental drug that I should be able to take, and the FDA literally won't let me take it. I'm going to die anyway. Like, give me the chance to take it. Why don't I have that personal freedom? And I don't think anybody's won any of those cases, which is fucked. Like, that's fucked.
Mm.
And yeah, there's plenty of risks with no upside in society today. And I hope to sort of get people thinking about some of the risks that we could take with upside and where technology can go when you allow test pilots to fly a new plane or take a new
Mm.
drug or synthesize something new. And this is sort of the foundation you said of, why Balaji is trying to start network states and create new jurisdictions with new rules. And it is all to make space for innovation, for progress, and for technology.
What often happens there is the fact that people get used to their current situation. So they're used to like the FDA shutting down ideas. They're used to,
Yeah.
like research papers getting rejected and having to start
Yeah.
again and go through this process. And when you look at other countries, he references China having 2 weeks to build a skyscraper. And if you compare that to the States, if you compare that to Ireland, where I'm originally from, Jesus Christ, they're still building it, right? But if you look at that, and if you look at like even Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Saudi, or the new country now that they're building,
Yeah.
it gives you a baseline because that's like the benchmark, or that's the baseline. That's where all the GDP is flowing in. That's where all the money's going in. That's where all the jobs are going. It's clearly working in other aspects of the world. So it's obviously just
Yeah.
rooted in bureaucracy that's not happening elsewhere. Now the question for you here is like, how do you change? Like, how do you change that institution? I know that's such a big question, but like there
Yeah.
has to be a next step.
I mean, yeah, there does. I think America uniquely for good, decent historical reason, just kind of like assumes that whatever they're doing is awesome and the best. And I think it's really helpful, as you point out, to be like, look around and be like, we're not the best at some stuff. Like a pretty, like, I love America. I'm bullish on the future, but like, there's some stuff we could learn from plenty of other countries.
Mhm.
And it would be great if we could do it. I want to believe that those institutions can change or sometimes be reformed, or be that sort of new great leadership um, can make changes and can move some things in the right direction, at least in some places. That's not always supported.
Mm.
It doesn't always happen. It can happen. Um, Balaji is basically basing his life's work on the fact that it's very difficult, nigh impossible, to reform institutions, and you just have to go to the frontier and create something new. Um,
Mm.
which there's a chapter on the frontiers, which I think is interesting, sort of through historical context. It's just like America is what it is today, or became what it was because it was the frontier for so long. It wasn't overregulated. There was plenty of space to grow. There's plenty of experiments being run. Lots of people were trying new things. And the internet has been and is the frontier really for a lot of us now over the last 20 years or so. It's where you can go, enter a meritocracy, do your work, experiment with new things, meet the people you want to meet. And he's like, the institutions are slowly always trying to sort of close the doors on the frontier and bring it into their control. And the pioneers and experimenters are always trying to create new frontiers or push things farther.
Mm.
And, the frontiers today are maybe out on the ocean in international waters. They're the edges of the internet. They are maybe in space, like maybe Mars will be the next frontier. Um, but the value of that space to experiment without sort of threatening the institution or needing to reform it, to just have the space for people to try things that they want to try.
Mm. It changes the baseline, right? Because you've access to the
Yeah.
internet, you can see people in China build something live
Yeah.
because you now see, fuck it, like that's that's what's happening.
Yeah.
So why aren't we there? And then you try to push the boundaries. I think someone for like you, like thinks like economically, being like it makes sense. And biology is like it makes sense to build it this way, but there's obviously a reason on the other side, which is like an incentive, a misaligned incentive. And I think that's
Yeah.
he mentions that about companies growing, and I've seen that. I've been in early stage startups, I've been in late stage startups. We have 4 or 5 employees in our company ourselves. you know the alignment changes as you grow, right? Sticking kind of
Hmm.
closer into that topic you mentioned about like even the political side of stuff, but it all feeds into one. I think this is what's interesting about this, is the fact that as you're mentioning these aspects, they still fit into the broader piece of like alignment across like policies, governments, companies, product, services. And one element is if it enrages, it engages. Now that's an absolute great quote. That's like that just sums up Twitter to me, to be honest. That's just
Yes.
that one alignment, because you know it just shows that like technology has been set up in a way to position rage and enrage people as a result. Because if it enrages, it engages.
Yeah.
How much significance does that have for you, for someone who actively uses Twitter now?
Uh, to be clear, the context of that quote is not a recommendation for a content strategy. It is some
It's
people
many
may
people's
interpret
though.
it.
It's many people's.
Yeah, yeah, and to be honest, like, I find that kind of disgusting. Like, I hate that. I hate that it
Same,
works,
same.
and I hate that people see that it works and go do it. It's cheap and short sighted and lame. It's just not valuable. And like
Yeah.
my moral code is something closer to like, if it's not good for people, don't do it. Just don't. I don't care how good it is for you. If it's not good for other people, like, it will make you worse, it will make them worse, and you will like hollow yourself out into this disgusting thing if you continue to pursue strategies that are good for you and bad for others. The context of that quote is about the traditional media and the clickbait headlines and the fact that they tend to distort stories exactly because they're incentivized to get page views and clicks. And a lot of this, the whole sort of middle part of the book is about truth, the different types of truth, the way that media especially traditional media, but to an increasing extent, to your point, also the incentives around social media are misaligned with finding truth, creating truth, sharing truths with others. And there's a lot of people, you can see it empirically online, who just live in this increasingly like unreal world that they've created for themselves through this echo chamber of misinformation that they lean into. And it is a absolutely like fabricated synthetic world that they live in, full of beliefs that are borderline insane, that they have no way to distinguish from fundamental reality and truth, because this is just their whole set of inputs. And
Alright guys, one short little update for Voex. I want to give a short little overview about my own company, my media company called Voex. So if you are a company or you are an enterprise looking to grow your brand and looking to grow your podcast, feel free to reach out to work with us at Voex. What we do is a fully fledged end-to-end management of your podcast. We take care of the strategy, the consulting, we take care of the growth, the management, we take care of all the editing, all the boring stuff, so you can focus on creating good podcasts and growing your brand. If you want to grow your podcast and get to new users, if you want to grow your business, generate more revenue and all that good stuff, check out the links down below to Voex. You can follow through to schedule a call with our team, or else you can fill out the application form to see if you qualify to work with us. Thank you.
the place, like there's a number of different places where they exist, and they're moving in all different directions. They're moving farther apart from each other. They're creating enemies that may or may not exist. And so there's a lot of prescription. I know, a lot of you and a lot of your listeners have business in media, and there's probably 5, maybe 10 very specific ideas for media companies to be built that are around much fuller alignment with their audience. It's about creating a win-win between the company and the audience. It's about delivering actual high value things other than engaging headlines, other than optimizing for views, short termism, just like raw numbers. Like if you can create something that actually improves your listeners' lives and helps them be better people, helps them be better in their community, helps the country be better, helps the world be better, moves human civilization forward, like you can make that choice, and you can choose to optimize for those metrics. You can choose to use a better playbook. And I think that those are all going to build better businesses over the long run. Like there's no, there's
100%,
no,
man.
there's no shortcuts, man. Like a shortcut is a dead end to a place you don't want to be in the first place. So take the hard road and set a high bar for yourself and your impact.
Thinking in decades, right? Because, as everyone talks shit about those like traditional media companies, the people who are, again, enraging to engage will ultimately follow those tendencies on a micro level until they get to a macro size and do the same thing. And like history doesn't
Yeah.
repeat itself, it often rhymes, right? So following that pursuit, and as you mentioned there about the different like echo chambers, it's funny because your idea of what you think that echo chamber could be like is completely different than what I think, because there's so many of them, right? There's like the
Yep.
money Twitter space, there's like the financial Twitter space, there's the Instagram space of like, yachts and whatnot. It's all like fucking rented and everything. So it's like all of these different elements, and that's why it's huge. It's huge for me with this podcast that the whole idea has been like to help younger people live a richer and more fulfilling life, and that's not woo woo. It's like literally because it helped me, and I was a first like listener, I was a first customer, and I feel like that's very important because there's so much information, but like 99% of it is garbage. Most people are making up numbers, posting screenshots of Stripe accounts that are fake, or there's politics stuff that are completely misaligned at the same time. So in that, and knowing this and having this awareness, where does the truth lie in terms of information, and how can you create a truth machine for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, one of the most interesting things I thought Balaji sort of put forward in this book is just that there are different types of truth. We're not
Mm.
used to thinking of truth as anything other than singular and like the hunt for it. But the fact that there is scientific truth, which is like I think what most people think of, but even scientists would say we're iterating slowly closer to the truth. Like we only have hypothesis with high degrees of confidence. Like that's as close to a scientific truth as we can get. There are maybe mathematical truths that are even more fundamental than that. but there's such thing as like a political truth, which is where a country border is or who the president is, which is really just consensus of a bunch of people. Um, but there's also like areas where no matter what people believe, the fundamental truth is could be something totally different. Right? There's a scientific truth, and then there's a social truth, and the social truth may not have anything to do with the scientific truth. And you can come up with your own examples. Um, but it is a fascinating thing to sort of see where the consensus of a group differs from what might be fundamental reality, and that's where the opportunities are, right? That transition in the book between like here's how you learn to see truths and see the gaps, that's a source of incredible business ideas, innovations, like where people say one thing and do another, where they say they prefer this, but they're actually willing to buy this thing that they said they didn't want. They say, like where the economic truth supersedes the political truth is a fascinating and deep pool of ideas.
Mm. He mentions as well in that aspect like physics and mathematics, and how
Hmm.
like people can believe like political truths and societal truths over mathematics and physics. How do you get that alignment over time? Like, is this literally looking at like financial statements or the proof of, let's say, your
Yeah.
Bitcoin wallet versus? Does that make sense? Like, how do we move the general population closer to a mathematical truth versus a societal truth?
I think it has a lot to do with you start with some solid education. Um, and hopefully you have the type of education that teaches you to be a critical thinker. Not everybody has that. Um, you know, some public schools are great at it, some aren't. Some private schools are great at it, some aren't. Some families are good at it, some are not. So if you suspect that you may not have uh, a solid grounding in critical thinking, which is like you don't need anything other than kind of the basics, but you have to be willing to apply like the basics of math, reading, maybe some stats, maybe some physics, but just being willing to be skeptical about a lot of those things and seek out alternative opinions. Don't just take what you get at face value. And remembering that, I mean, a little like you said earlier, like you're constructing the truth, you're constructing your perception of the truth through every little decision you make about who to hang out with, who to follow, who to listen to. And it's not physically possible to be a deep first principles critical thinker on every decision and every fact that you're ever presented with, right? You have to trust the people around you or the people you follow to some extent for some domain a lot of the time, maybe even almost all the time. So it becomes really important to determine what kinds of people you want to allow to establish facts for you and who you trust to sort of outsource the job of assessing truth to. Um,
Mm.
you know, I think there's a line in the book about many people accept only social truths. Like everyone accepts different kinds of proof for when they decide what a
Mm.
truth is, and it's really important to know what people are looking at when they determine what's a truth. Um, and it's back to your point about who you choose to follow and influencers and what's real and what's not. Like you got to be really careful to only choose influences on your life that are examples of where you want to end up. Like it is
100%.
extremely difficult to pick and choose people and say like, "Oh, I follow this guy for his business advice, but I don't want to be like his family life, but I listen to everything he says in business." And it's like that is a very difficult line to draw and you have to constantly like hold the wall up. You don't know where his business life and his personal life sort of advice starts and ends. It's all the same thing. Like you can't pick and choose. So pick heroes, influences, inspirations who you admire the whole of their life, ideally closer to the end of their life so you know how their story ends. And don't be willing to sort of take on people's outlooks on life unless you want the results that they got. Um, and I don't think most people want like the people that tend to become famous and tend to become big influencers that people follow tend to be extreme people. Like that's why they got
Mhm.
famous in the first place. People are attracted to extreme versions of their own opinions, their own little seedlings of opinions, but they don't actually want to be that extreme, or shouldn't, or if they find themselves there, I regret getting there,
Yeah.
or have this crisis along the way, right? So try to find, even if they're much quieter, lesser known heroes or inspirations, like try to find people that you actually want all of their life. Otherwise, you may be signing yourself up for a dangerous fall one day.
And if you think about like education and his reference even towards education, the fact that, young people they're naturally exposed to a lot of these people, they get the wrong impression, they'll get attached to them, and even people that are older. So I even had someone reference recently to me, someone was mentioning about Alex Ramosi, and they were like, oh, well, I don't listen to his personal advice, but only his business advice. So just like you said there, right? But the dude
Yes.
works 16 hours a day. And also, I've spoken with like psychologists who like examined his level of deep work, and that puts him in like the top 0.001% of all time. Like he's someone who can focus for like 8 to 12 hours a day, whereas like most of us monkeys can only focus for 4 hours a day, like literally scientifically. So it's like those people are in that extra bracket that he's like a human of human, right? He's just like a superhuman as a result. So it's like taking these things with a pinch of salt, but finding the right mentors, right? Having an Alex Ramosi as a mentor versus someone down at your local bar is 10 times better to move towards that goal. But it's about when, and I actually, you might find this interesting. I call it the graduation phase. So it's like when I wanted to start
Hmm.
my first podcast, I had like, someone that I really aspired, and I graduated out of his content because I wasn't learning how to do this anymore. And you move on to better
Yeah.
people, right? And then you move on to a Balaji when you're trying to, build your first fund and invest into multiple different companies. And there's nothing wrong with that. I
Yeah.
don't think there's anything wrong with that because as you mature as a human, when you have your first kid or you get married or whatever, you'll have new influences that positively influence where you want to go in your life next.
Yeah, I think graduation's a good way to think about it. And maybe even p- deciding early when you're going to graduate, because it's dangerous to like carry that forward, right? But you don't want to spend like your entire 30s being obsessed with somebody who has no respect for like the family piece of
Yeah,
life for other humans if it's important to you, because you feel like you're constantly making this trade-off of like, oh, I'm trying to be this person, but there's no time, there's no space for that in my life, even though it's important to you, because you're modeling yourself off someone that doesn't give a shit about something that's important to you. There's all those like, you can create a lot of tension and stress for yourself, I guess,
100%.
by trying to become five very different, very extreme people at the same time. Um,
Mhm.
and to your point, like, it's maybe better to have somebody that at your local bar, it's great to just be able to index against the best of humanity and have access to them without feeling like you have to adopt the entire persona of all of them at the same time.
And then you're never going to be happy, right? Because just comparison's a thief of joy. You're going to be just following it
Yes.
until you, and it's funny because you swap one system for another system, right? Or one like matrix, quote
Yes.
unquote, like as in you just get to the next level and you're never going to be happy, so on and so forth. You mentioned in the book, many things that are true are unpopular, and many things that are untrue are popular. So that's like a fucking great quote because I think to me what that means is like, you know, doing the basic stuff works, especially in like business, right? So I run a service business. Cold outreach works,
Hmm.
fulfillment works, making my customers happy work, and that's what builds a business. In many aspects, you as an investor, you look at a lot of decks, you invest wisely, you just make the process better, and you learn from the experience, right? I feel that a lot of people are just chasing the stuff that's just popular, that's just largely untrue, and they
Yeah.
lead to ruin in many aspects, right?
Yeah. I mean, we're programmed to do it, right? Like we are evolutionarily evolved to be like create consensus in a tribe and agree with each other and not get kicked out of the tribe. And what most people believe tends to become the thing that everybody believes. Um,
Mhm.
it's a very interesting, it's an interesting thing to observe about ourselves. Um, and and again, like 90% of the time, it's probably best to go with the crowd. Like if everybody's eating at this restaurant, it's probably good. If everybody's
Mhm.
not eating this food, like maybe it's bad. Um, there's a ton of times when you have to go with that, and it's exhausting to not do it, but you have to. And I think that quote is a really good reminder for when you're trying to do something special, you've really got to stop and say, what is most popular is probably untrue. And there's probably a different path for me. And I'm in this domain of life, very specifically seeking out a different path. And I'm willing to do a lot of extra work or look a little silly or
Mm.
get booed or like take a risk of failure to find that other path. Um, to find something that's unpopular but true, because that's where a lot of the returns are in life.
And jumping into the founding element on that, when he references the U curve, so for
Hmm.
context, that I think that applies really well to this scenario because it's like in that U curve on the X axis you have revenue or longevity in the business, and on Y axis you have popularity. So when you start your
Hmm.
business, everyone's like, "Oh, well done, thank you for well done for
Yeah.
leaving the 9 to 5." And then when you start it, everyone hates you or thinks it's a scam or thinks that it's going to fail or whatever. And it goes down the U curve. And then it finally takes off and gets consensus. So it feels like when you
Yeah.
go off to do something that's different in that regard, like you explained, um, initially everyone claps and then everyone judges and then people ask for advice, and that's how I can describe it, right? So like how have
Yeah.
you seen that even what you develop? Because like what you're investing in or what you're looking at is obviously abstract ideas a lot of the time, otherwise you wouldn't be investing in it,
Hmm.
right? um so like how does that play out in your own kind of mental model?
Yeah. I think of it as when you know that that's what's coming externally, and I think it's true, and I've seen it over and over again. Um, you know what you need to bring sort of energetically to yourself or to your team or to CEOs in the portfolio, to like counteract that, right? When you first announce a company or it's a baby or everyone's like, "Oh yeah, like this is amazing, you're going to be great." And it's like, "Hey, I love you, I support you, but just so you know, like you're not shit until you've achieved some stuff." So like let's not retire on day one because some people are complimenting you. Like it's easy to get
Mm,
complacent when you have that acceptance. And then a few years later, where you're 2 years in and nothing that you thought was going to work is going to work, and you've sort of let down your first few customers that you thought were slam dunks, then it's like you come in with and people are really down and people are calling you, overrated from what they said about you from the launch. Then you got to come in with like, hey, like this is the second inning, this is a long game, you've learned so much, there's plenty of game left, like you've got this, that you still have people who are interested, there's still huge potential here, like stick with it, stick with it, stick with it. And then, as you come out of that, it's like, okay, like let's not let off the gas. People are excited about you, but we've got to keep moving. We got to keep moving. Think in
mm,
decades. Keep almost moving the goalpost on yourself, to just
yeah.
see what you're capable of.
And I have to be completely honest here, like that's one of the reasons why, well, not directly, but I guess indirectly, why I didn't build a tech platform, because I knew
Mm.
you have that period, that trough in many regards, right? It looks like a trough whereby like it's like pain, 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 and then you obviously want to break through, and like you're probably losing so much money, and there's a lot of different factors that come into it, right? So like I run a service business which is cash flow positive, so like if things go tits up, we still have cash that can pay salaries and pay this and pay that. Does that make sense? That it's like a different model. It still completely applies in different ways, but
Yeah.
I feel like that the depth of the U curve is less severe in non-tech businesses, which is obviously why you get the Airbnbs and the Googles when they break through. But it's like, how long has Google been around? Like 25 years, and it's only
Yeah.
at that point now, and still people want to close it down, right?
Did you have that curve with the podcast?
For sure. But for me, it's like why I think it's interesting with the podcast is the fact that, at the time I was working in finance, I was working for like a
Mm.
tech finance, like a fintech company. So it's like I didn't have that incentive, which is like, oh my God, I have to literally eat like rice for like the next 4 years. Cause it was like I
Hmm.
was allowing it to grow while I was working. And then as it was picking up steam, I kind of came through that trough period, and I feel like it's a series of miniature troughs. At
Yeah.
some point, that's where life is, right? But I feel like that gave me such a good instance in terms of like business. It was like a micro level because it was less severe.
Hmm.
And then when I moved into running a media company. Um, I've obviously had that. I've had like many downs, but I just know personally. I know a lot of founders of guys who are doing 10, 20 million valuations of companies, and it's just not as intense. I'll put it that way. Now again, the
Yeah.
payoff's
I
not as
mean,
good, right? But different
yeah.
scenario.
Yeah, every business has its own story, and I think you were correct. Balaji is like indexing really hard on higher tech startups in that example, but I think to some extent every business or every product has that, and I think what you did is smart. I've tried to do something similar of like layering those curves so that like when you have one business or product that is like going really well, you're investing in another one that can do really well later, so that you're a little more balanced out. You go through the
Mhm.
trough when you still have a 9 to 5, if you get the chance to. Um, can be really psychologically balancing, I think.
For sure. That's very interesting, man. And yeah, it's just different instances you can take in. I think these are just models that you can apply to different aspects of life as well, right? That's what's
Hmm.
becomes like that's what makes this kind of very valuable long term. I want to get into some of the aspects on the scale side of things. So he speaks a lot about building SaaS first, code second, and hire last. Can you talk me through that process in terms of like how that applies to like even the earliest stage startups that would try get even venture backed early on?
Yeah, I mean, it is really just being as time efficient and capital efficient as you possibly can to solve each individual problem.
Mhm.
The whole kind of back third of the book is really a handbook for being a founder, especially a founder of a high tech company. Very specific, all the way through like sort of the mindset, and then thinking through ideas, validating them, launching, building, engineering, like growing. There's a lot of Balaji's approach is, I think, kind of unique for a lot of those different things. And so I'm
Mhm.
excited to like see what people can do with it. Um, it's a little, if you liked 0 to 1, like that whole section is like Balaji's version of 0 to 1, and he's such a quantitative thinker and like so rigorous with the frameworks that I think
Mhm.
I've already sent that chapter to like some founders that I know who are like, how do I approach this? And I'm like,
Yeah.
here's like the 3 chapters that you need. That's like literally the step by step guide to like, here's how you structure your thinking and execute against that. Cause it's a weird, some of those are really weird problems. It's hard to figure out. Um, but yeah, the SaaS first. It's like, can you solve this with a $10 a month tool and eliminate your time? If not, can you build a program that can solve it? Um, if not, can you hire somebody who can handle it for you? So it's just like,
Mm.
what's the fastest, cheapest way to solve this problem and move on to the next one? And I think that's the quote you started the show with. Like,
Mm.
what's the most important thing on my to-do list? How quickly and effectively can I solve it, reorient, and move on to the next one?
I think what's so important there as well with big tech platforms you're building, or any platform you're building, is he
Yeah.
mentioned around the markets. So if you're thinking about two different markets, you want to go after the bigger one, or if it's a subsection within a market. Now for a lot of founders, like that's it's quite interesting because like like I'll give you an example. My friend has a robot advisory company. So robot advisory is like popular. Loads of people know it. It's not new anymore. But he has like a B2B robot advisory firm that does like for huge banks. So that's
Mhm.
small within a larger industry. But then there's still like a really big industry within that industry that's less evergreen if it was a robot advisory firm that was B2C, for instance. So I thought that's what was kind of interesting. So I was relating that back to Balaji's example, and I was like, well, yeah, one smaller than the other, but then the larger market has more competition. So that was a weird one for me.
Yeah, I think so. There's 2 different ways to answer that or resolve that sort of contrast. The first is you want a really really big market, but you also need a very specific entry point to the market, right? So like Facebook, enormous market. Every human being on earth should have the thing, but also famously very specific, very small initial market, which was the students at Harvard, the current students at Harvard. And then it became students at multiple campuses. Then it became all students. Then it college students. Then it became all high school and college students. And it just sort of slowly expanded from that very specific initial market. And so you'll see a lot of even very, very big companies started with super hyper specific markets that they win the majority of that market and then move to an adjacent market, move to an adjacent market.
Mm.
So what the decision that you want to make early on is just not to is to pick a big market eventually, but then find a very specific entry point where you can win quickly, cheaply, the majority of that market, and then that makes it easier to win to tip the next domino, and then tip the next domino, and then tip the next domino. So I think there's that's one. The other is just comparing the scale of the eventual opportunity makes
Mm.
everything along the way easier, especially in technology, right? So as an investor, like venture capitalist, if I'm looking at three different companies, it's very you diligence the founders. Sometimes it's easy to tell who's great. Rarely. You diligence the technology. Sometimes you can tell if the technology is real. Not always. The things that are I'm just being honest, it's very difficult to diligence the technology when the founder is saying like, "Hey, I need $3 million to go see if this technology is real," and that's sometimes the story. And you're like, you're like, "How do you diligence that?" It's like, I don't know. You give the guy the money and go see.
So how do you diligence the founder in that regard? So if it was me, for instance, if you were speaking to me, like I'm just like this crazy dude that's on the internet, right? And like, yeah, I've done other things in the past, but if I was to say to you, like, let's build this AI platform, like, how
Yeah.
would you evaluate me in that instance? Do you get me?
uh, you would be, no offense, a pretty easy pass for an AI platform because, to my knowledge, you do not have any like technical expertise in AI. Um, if you had a co-founder who like had an amazing like computer engineering background,
Yeah.
like now we're talking. Like you got the distribution, but like there's one company we invested in. I did a podcast with the founder actually, so like that's kind of an interesting you could hear that in that conversation, right? Like, he came and he's like, "Hey, I worked in this lab at MIT. There's incredible battery technology that is like we did in the lab that could be like a 10x improvement on all lithium ion batteries. I want I need some money to go see if we can build like a larger format version of the technology that we proved in the lab." And so I'm like, that's fucking awesome. Like that is an incredibly
Mm.
huge market. There's huge amounts of lithium ion batteries. There's a huge demand for them. If we can build the ones that are at this capacity, it creates even newer markets, totally changes the structure of the energy grid, totally changes transportation, makes electric jets possible. Um, like the world changes a lot if you can reach higher energy density lithium ion batteries. Can you diligence that technology? I can read the papers. I can consult with experts who can say, like, yes, that's theoretically possible, but no one's ever built a large format lithium ion cell at that energy density before. And this is like what the money is for to go build that. So, how do you diligence that technology? I don't know. But this guy's worked in, he's been a battery chemistry engineer
Mm.
at two different companies and he's worked in a lab at MIT. So, like, I'm going to take that bet. It's a chance you could lose that small amount of money, or you could be the first investor in this $100 billion company that builds all the batteries or some huge percentage of the batteries on earth. Like
Mm.
that's the kind of bet that you have to take as a venture capitalist. It's just very different than like normal small business investing.
Of
um,
course.
the risk rewards are just very different and bizarre. So it's tough to diligence that stuff.
Hmm. That's where it's interesting because it's like that 3 million, for instance. Where did the number three come from? Right. Of course, you can do some sort of like mathematical model, try to find the truth from it, but to some degree, for you in that instance, I wouldn't say you're guessing, but I but I guess you're moving closer towards that to try to
Oh, that
find an accurate an accurate truth.
yeah. The number comes from the founder of just like, here's the money that I think I need to spend to reach the next milestone to get more funding to keep going, right?
Mhm.
Which again, very different from the service business, right?
Of
um,
course, of course.
so yeah, it's putting on and off different mental models to make different decisions in different domains. But it's also those what I get excited about, because those are the kind of companies that, back to the point of the value of technology, like totally change the face of humanity and what it is like to be a human, and how good all of our individual experiences are, how comfortable, how adventurous, how exciting, how safe. um, how abundant, like all of that comes from that kind of technological leap. And
Mhm.
I wish more entrepreneurs, more investors respected the what comes out of that and spent less time worrying about, derivative options trading because they know a guy who made a bunch of money on it, and more on, holy shit, there's this incredible new potential battery technology that could change the face of the planet and enable billions of people to live better lives. And there's just like a deep moral good in that, and you can make a bunch of money doing it. So like you're not really
Yeah.
giving up on your dreams of riches and yachts. You're just
Yeah.
actually doing some good along the way. So like I don't know, that's life is too short to just like do things for the cause of only money. Um,
Hmm.
and I think technology is just a really exciting way to do good, learn things, understand more about the nature of the universe, help people, and earn a good living along the way.
And when you mention the fact that, as like VCs or Balaji will only invest in like large scale, it's because like that's the idea of tech, right? As you mentioned,
Yeah,
if you can hit a higher frequency of volume of people, well, then it becomes more valuable to pick those lithium batteries and make them better, right? And to your point about the finance people, I think it was Elon Musk that said he hates like the financial industry or just like finance people in general because they're smart enough to be the founder, they're smart enough to be the CEO and to build a
yeah,
shitload of stuff, but of course, they
yeah,
just bought the lie and just went into Goldman Sachs, right? And as a result, it's like lost potential because those dudes could change direction and build all of these companies and probably better than probably
yes,
better than most of us making up along the way, which is just funny how
yes,
like we just realign priorities towards
yeah,
it could be whatever aspect of the world that you actually want to try to fix, right? Or just try to work towards.
yeah. If you're yet to pick your career life path, I beg you to spend less time on finance and less time in law, and more time in
Mm,
engineering, more time in science, more time in art, more time in like building a business that makes people's lives better. Um,
mhm.
there's I genuinely think you'll be happier for it, and probably more successful. Like find a way to grow the pie. Um,
Mhm. That's interesting, man. Because again, at the end of the day, everything's struggle, right? No matter what you're doing, it's going to be difficult. You might as well pick the right vehicle that you're going to enjoy building over a long period. I want to ask you
yeah,
about wealth.
choose a culture. Choose a culture you want to exist in. Like
Yeah,
the pool that you choose to swim in is going to affect you. So pick a pool that is going to turn you into the kind of person that you want to be.
we go back. That relates back to the media, right? It all it all intertwines. That relates back to the
Yeah.
media, what you consume. All value becomes digital. All wealth becomes digital.
Mm.
How do you think about that yourself, from your own personal circumstances, even like investments, even crypto, blockchain, different aspects?
Well, it fucking makes me wish I knew how to code. I've been meaning to learn how to code for like 10 years now, since like my first day of work at a software company when I was like, oh, the engineers like run this place. Got it. Maybe I should learn how to code. I keep trying. It's like it's not my brain is not great at that stuff. Um, I think it's a really interesting, like the sort of pillars of that statement are from Balaji's point of view, which there is laid out in I think some of the prior chapters, but is like the rise of robotics is going to be insane. Like we're seeing, you know, the Tesla autopilot cars, really awesome. Like I'm riding in driverless cars, so cool. Really happening. Starting to see humanoid robots. Starting to see a lot more robots deployed in factories. Um, and the more things get sort of robotified, the more value is like under the control of someone who can code, can build software, can issue commands. Naval has a great quote about this: "Is like the robot revolution is already here. They're just packed into data centers. You can't see them, but they're there. And if you learn to code, you can control this
Mhm.
army of robots." It's an incredibly high leverage skill set, and you know whether you take, there's Mark Andreessen's like software's eating the world quote. Like there's a lot left to do in software. And now that we have crypto, now that we have AI, now that we have robots, or increasingly have robots, there is just so much that can be done and created. And it's easy to roll your eyes at like, oh my God, another software company. Software's magic. Software's absolute magic. Like the value that is created by the right program is absolutely unbelievable. And, this is an idea from the Naval book, but like you can spend 10 hours coding a program. And if it's the right program, it can create millions of dollars of value and you can be retired. If you have the right insight and the right skill, you can create an insane amount of value in an incredibly short
Mm.
amount of time. And that takes, that takes seeing the fundamental truth, that takes having built the skill to write the thing in the first place, that takes understanding that that kind of leverage can exist, that takes seeing the value that technology can provide for millions of people at scale. But it's a really it's it's a mind breaking thing because we are not evolved to understand, having a global market at our fingertips and creating value for them through typing. Like it,
Mhm.
it just seems like wizardry.
Mhm.
But it's a miracle and it's available to everybody who wants to sort of jump in that ring. It's an incredible meritocracy. So
And you can
I
also
think that's,
partner up with someone. Just your point earlier, right? Is that if you
yeah,
if you
yeah, yeah,
physically can't do the code like you can just partner
yeah,
up with a super smart dude from MIT, right? He can code,
yeah.
and you can just split the 100 million, right?
There are now a lot of engineers out there, right? Like it used to be really hard to like wrangle software engineers, and the great ones are still very difficult. You can find ones that are 100x or 1000x better than others. Um, but there are now a lot of people out there. So if you have an insight that you think you can't find software programs for, but just, I mean, to use podcasting example, like a company that we invested in is Zencaster. Like they are slowly like
No way.
creating beautiful software to give podcasters incredible leverage. They'll automate, they use AI to do the transcripts. They'll use AI to do the clips. They'll use AI to build this ad network. So you can like sort of automatically sell ads that are relevant to your audience through this dynamic. It's like Facebook ads for podcasting.
Mhm.
Like you don't need a huge software stack of tools. You don't need a huge team to run a podcast. There's incredible products out there that are the result of software.
That's wild. I did not realize you're an investor in Zencaster. That's pretty cool. I remember seeing it very very early on, about three
Yeah,
four years ago. When did you invest in it?
pretty recently. Pretty
Really? That's
recently.
funny because I remember being very like basic, like 2020, like having like very
Yeah,
little.
I mean, it was a like I think a solo founded like bootstrap company for the first few years, and then he was like, actually, there's a big opportunity here. Like we're gonna really go all in. We see AI coming. We're gonna turn this into a big platform, not a small SaaS
Mm.
tool for podcasters. And that's kind of when we started to pay attention. And once they started moving in the like ad network direction,
Mhm.
we're like, oh, this is really cool. This is really cool.
That's super interesting. So part of our media company, we do like ad revenue, ad sponsorships, and the amount of money that's flowing into podcasting in the industry,
Yes.
like at the moment from previous, as in like I mean like 2021, 2022, 2023 is like literally wild. Like it's crazy. We
Yeah.
have like not even that many, like maybe 10 to 15 companies or podcasts in our portfolio, and it's crazy the amount of interest they have.
Yep.
And it's not from small companies, right? It's from big tech companies who have like large marketing budgets that want to invest in this kind of new way of running ads. And we do like a lot of those integrations and stuff. So it's funny how like platforms can facilitate it because the
Yeah.
industry is so fragmented. You've no idea. Sure, you've been recording for
Yeah.
many years, right? You see how bad it's been over the years.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked with sort of podcast agencies and individual dudes who are agencies, and I've sold ads directly to companies. And yeah, it's just like it's a bunch of people forwarding emails and sending around invoices. Like that's the podcast ad industry right now. Some
Mhm.
agencies, and it is so it is so obvious the need, especially in the like long tail of smaller shows, that to deploy big dollars, you have to get programmatic deployment, right? And so like when you go to Zencaster, you can invest in 100, 200, 500 shows at once that all have specific, you say, hey, I don't want anybody swearing and I want them to be, majority female audience and I want them to be, you know, under 40. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
well, we can drop you into 400 podcasts in a batch, and it's paid per conversion, not just pay per impression, which is
Mm.
quite an awesome program. So I think that's, that's a moment where what is a very inefficient system for ad buying and for revenue generating on the podcaster side, those smaller podcasts, it doesn't make sense to go cut a deal, like for a brand to go cut a deal with 100 different small podcasts. Like the return isn't there just on the human effort it takes. But if you can buy
Yeah.
ads in 100 or 200 of them at once, all of a sudden that starts to make sense. And these podcasters can sort of close that gap between being like, man, I'm not big enough to warrant like a, you know, pitching companies for an ad deal. And so they
Mhm.
can, start earning even as a much smaller podcast. I'm excited
That's
about it.
awesome, man.
I think it's huge. I'm a huge fan of podcasting. I think we're still day one, man, of this whole industry. Um,
Mhm.
so I'm excited about it as a podcaster, as a person with an ad budget, like,
Mhm.
and as an investor. Like I'm psyched.
I thought it was quite interesting when I first got into the space how, like, YouTube, you just have like YouTube and you upload the video and it goes out, and it was like so simple. So like when I was like a
Yeah,
kid, I was playing Call of Duty, right, and it was like so simple to like upload videos onto YouTube, right. Then when I
yeah,
saw podcasting, there was like 14 different platforms, and I used to think like, oh my god, like aggregating this would be like the best tool. But of course,
yep,
like at that point, there's still friction between Apple and Spotify. So there is so many opportunities for SaaS, code, and then hire within podcasting. And like
yeah.
I've tried experimented different things in the past, but it's a matter of time before I actually probably would do something again that's in the space, because the amount of people that are coming into the industry is like, it's actually wild. It's probably like one of the most kind of secret industries to some degree that's growing so significantly that no one's really
Yeah.
as interested in compared to like AI, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to, just because it's been around for, I don't know, what, 15 years? Something like that,
Approximately.
close. iPhone was 2007, so probably a little lower than that. But like people are like, "Oh my god, podcasting's been around, like it's normal, it's whatever." Um, but it has changed a lot, and it's growing like crazy. It's replacing TV in a lot of really interesting ways, like filling all the gaps in like long form conversations that used to be on like primetime TV, but that you don't see on Netflix and stuff. But I think, I think some of these really high production value podcasters like Chris Williamson and David Perel are like, I think we'll see their catalogs like optioned into Netflix or Hulu. I think we'll see,
Mm.
my friend David Sunrose, the creator of the Founders podcast,
Mhm.
is a huge influence on me. He's like, this is the printing press of audio. Like this is day one of an incredible new format. Um, and to your point, like I think, the SaaS code hire, like Zencaster is trying to be the all-in-one SaaS tool for podcasters of like, they do
Mm.
editing, they do distribution, they do transcripts, they do ads, they do, like, you only need one tool to start as a podcaster, and they're trying to be that one tool. Disclosure, obviously, investor, but that's their goal, which I think is cool and sounds relevant for probably everybody listening who's thinking about a media company or actively building one.
It's super exciting, man, because like we do large productions too, right? We're
Yeah,
trying our best to do them like bigger and bigger, and there's like
yeah,
an
man, your
art and a
YouTube is
format to it.
beautiful.
But trying to make it better and better, right? And like people like Chris,
Yeah,
for instance, are like huge influences. Rich Roll, huge influence. That cinematic feel is like so. I think it's like novel to some degree, and it's like taking in actual films. And I think like your mind works like so far ahead. It's like 10 steps ahead. Like I did not even consider like the Hulu or Netflix of podcasting,
oh,
but that's like a SaaS product in its own, right? It's like you have
oh,
all these high production videos that you can index and bring through, and then it elevates the standards. I literally had a LinkedIn post on this like 2 hours ago, saying that like studio podcasts will decline next year, and remote podcasts will decline, and studio first podcasts will increase, like in terms of how audience capture it, how YouTube favor content, just because of the production value will increase. I know we're going off tangent a small bit, but I think it's just quite interesting because like I love like kind of thinking about how your brain works in terms of this, because you're always thinking 2 to 4 steps ahead, which not a lot of people are not doing, including myself. I wouldn't be that far ahead in terms of like that thinking.
Yeah, it's very interesting that what started as an audio only format and people loved it because it was audio only is now and people are feeling like they need a studio and a big budget and a fancy videographer to kind of like continue. I don't, I don't know. It depends on how your audience breaks down, right? Like whether,
Yeah.
if you're going all in on YouTube, like my YouTube is very small compared to my like listenership audience.
Mhm.
Maybe that'll flip one day, but probably also not without investing a ton. I don't,
Mhm.
is your most of yours still listeners, or is you do majority YouTube?
It see for me it was all video. So I like started with this premise
Yeah,
in 2021 was like
yeah,
I'm like I'm like dyslexic on paper, right? So I'm a visual learner. So
yeah.
always just from when I was younger, it was always visual, it's design, it's a lucid chart for me, just always going through my career. Always a visual learner. So when I got into podcasting, I found it very difficult to analyze my own videos or own episodes
Mm,
until it was video. And then I would like watch the Joe Rogans, I would watch a Tim Ferriss. And so I just always led with it. And then when YouTube started changing their algorithm and coming out with podcast indexes, I just this was like 2 years ago. I just went all in on it. So a big premise of our company is we only focus on video with podcasts. So we do
yeah,
this like higher level of production, and then what happens is it does diverge into um audio. But for a lot of the shows that we manage, they are businesses. Like they're
yeah.
they're big corporations doing 100 million, 200 million a year. So they're looking for like the business incentive in terms of how the products and service integrate, which gives us
Hmm.
so much dynamic content from video. So it just seems like it's more versatile and flexible.
Yeah.
Which is just different, right? Like people didn't think that it was going to be like a business 10 years ago, and then it happened now and it turned around, and now podcasting is a business to many
Oh
degrees.
yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I like the brand impression that you get from just doing really high quality video. Like even if you don't
Mm,
even actually watch the video, there's something about it happening in a studio that like
yeah.
it feels it's like the difference between like, oh, I write a blog and I wrote a book. There's just like
Mm,
a prestige and a seriousness of the intent and the packaging around it, that just like signals to listeners the right thing, I think.
100%. And brand is everything, right? In terms of how you think and longevity, and especially with your books, how you present your books. And it goes back to, yet again, focusing on the right things, right? Instead of pissing people off on the internet, growing from that way, you're doing something that's actually helpful. I want to ask you about the aging element. So I've had many people on my show that were, reversing aging in different domains. So some people are much more health orientated. They were just very focused on good diet, some biometrics, some different even ways to measure their health, I guess. Where do you kind of fall on that spectrum in terms of like your thinking towards the future?
Yeah, I like where Balaji went, which is like not life extension but youth extension, just really about like staying healthier for longer. um
Mhm.
I am a little dubious of humans just being like, oh, like let's live forever until we learn how to change our minds.
Mhm.
That the saying like physics advances one death at a time, I think is true outside of physics. And we as a species are constantly sort of investing in the next generation and trying to make them better than the one before. um, and a lot of we are not good at displacing ideas from our heads, and so I'm not sure that us all living forever is amazing until we learn to sort of stay youthful in our physical brains, which just feels like a frontier that has not yet been cracked. I think we'll learn to keep bodies alive for much longer. I think we need to invest a lot in the mind side of things. Um, but the practical upshot of that day to day now is just let's learn to live more healthfully. Let's eat the right stuff, stop drinking, stop smoking, um,
Mhm.
exercise, sleep well. Part of the abundance that we get to live in now is that we have the opportunity to be healthy, to feel good all the time from being healthy.
Mhm.
And unless you have done the work to have one of those chapters of your life, it's hard to appreciate how good that feels. But it's there and it's available to almost everybody now. And even if it doesn't always feel good in the moment that you're choosing chicken and broccoli over a burger and fries, like your 50-year-old self, your 60-year-old self, your 70-year-old self would be very, very grateful for it, because you are
Mm.
just staying healthy. Almost no matter what your goal is, like health is a really good precursor to it. Like if you want to be attractive, most of attractiveness is actually just fucking being healthy. If you want to be
100%.
wealthy, a lot of being like good at your job and focused and present and impressing people is just being healthy and having energy. Um, like it is the foundation of almost everything else. If you want to be
Mhm.
a good family man, if you want to be around for a long time, be healthy. Don't be a burden to your family. Like be able to still contribute and work at 70, 75, 80, um, and just respecting yourself. Like that comes from just putting the right stuff in you, um, and doing the work every day to take care of yourself. Like that's the beginning of a lot of great things. So I don't worry too much about where the finish line is. I just try to like make all the decisions each day that give me all the best options for the future.
So interesting you said about the mental side versus the body, because like people ruin their bodies, like Americans, or like people in all different cultures, like bad diet. The American diet, like the standard American diet is so poor on people's bodies to begin with, so like
Not
it's
that the
almost
Irish
like
are that much better, to be clear.
not at all, right? And this is where I was going to lead into, is the fact that you know it's hilarious to think about, oh, let's expand lifespan, when we are thinking about like alcohol. Like alcohol consumption in Ireland is absolutely wild, right?
Yeah,
Smoking, all these different things. It's like that meme, right, where it's like trying to be healthy, and at the beginning it's just like eat less, train more. At the top it says eat less, train more, and the middle is like measuring glucose levels and all this. It's like, to
yeah.
some degree, you don't need all those biometrics. And it's funny because I interviewed a guy called Chris Mirabile.
Mm,
Such an interesting dude. You should check out. He has created like they raise capital to create like a supplement. It's like a longevity supplement, but it's on a few different elements. But I recorded with the guy, and he has a physical age of 39, but so that's biological age, and then like a biomarker age of 26. So it's like 13 years of difference. I think I got those terms right. And like I was asking him like what's his perspective versus the more extreme, where you're measuring every single element. And he barely measures anything, and he still
mm.
has a dessert with his girlfriend every 2 or 3 weeks when they go out for dinner, and he have a glass of red wine every once in a while. And the dude looks super young, he's super healthy. He runs a longevity company, and they're really in the longevity space, which is a booming industry, by the way. For instance, you may obviously have a look closer at it. It's like something that's really, really been increasing a lot recently in the last couple of years. But I thought it was interesting as someone who's trying to be at the frontier of improving longevity. He just focused on strength training, running on the beach in Florida, sleeping 8 hours, not being too stressed as a CEO of a company, bear in mind, creating a
Yeah.
good work culture, and not basically pissing people too much off and causing them to have health issues, right? I thought it was a
Yeah.
super interesting, because he was looking at the Brian Johnson equivalent, and just thinking that yes, it'll increase the number on a page, but all the other circumstances that lead to that lead to a worse, I would say, like livelihood as a result, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everybody gets to kind of set the dial where they want to. I think Brian Johnson is really interesting just as an extreme example, a little bit back to the like, if Alex Hormozy is the Alex Hormozy of business, Brian Johnson is the Brian Johnson of health. Like you can't be both of those dudes, like, nor probably do you want to be. There's stuff to learn from them. It's interesting. I'm grateful that, there's people out there pushing the boundaries in every direction. And I do think we'll learn a lot from Brian Johnson. Um, I don't think you have to be a longevity nut to like gain value from living more
Mm,
healthfully, and seeing some of that stuff along the way. There's another company we invested in that is like their approach is to slowly like they're starting as a prosthetics company, and they're like with the long term vision that you can replace an entire physical human body with robotics, and that is a way to sort of increase the active lifespan, at least, and again, as much as your brain and head can hold out, which takes us back to the frontier of the mind and how little we know about that, and
Mm.
preserving that, and keeping it young, keeping it fresh, keeping it able to change its mind and continue learning and taking in new ideas. Um,
Mm.
and it's an important way to live, even if you're not going to live forever. But the longer you live, the more important it is to be able to change your mind and find truths, the right truths.
Yep, 100%. And there's people that are on the frontier that are practice. So Brian Johnson, Alex Hormozy are practice, and then there's people like Andrew Huberman, who's theory, which I love because
Hmm.
his whole idea is to bring down the element of bring science, make science accessible to everyone in the US. That's his overarching element on it. I think it's fantastic because even last night I was looking at his like sleep supplement stack. Like mine like ran out. And I was like, oh, I wonder like what are these different components he has. I thought it was very interesting in that perspective because he doesn't like vomit his opinion down. He's just like, this is the science. This is exactly what you can do. And those videos are getting 3 million views, 4 million views. So that shift
Yeah,
is happening. But versus thinking like, how do we live forever? It's like, how do we improve our certain circumstances? It's kind of like when people say they want to be
yeah,
rich, but they have like broke habits, right? They're just going out spending
yep.
money on dumb shit, right? It's like, you cannot have that desired outcome without fixing the short term objective.
And back to the like sort of contrast between the institutions and the self education, like isn't
Mm.
that what the FDA is supposed to be doing? Isn't that what like the government is supposed to be doing with all the tax money that we're giving it to like fund science? Why does it fall to Andrew Huberman to be the person who is like educating us all on what is actually like healthy for us? And it's largely because
So true.
just constant misinformation from people who the regulatory capture of some of these institutions is like, let's think about why we're all listening to Andrew Huberman and like trust him more than an agency with $100 million budget or $1 billion budget. I don't even know how big their budgets are, but it's more than Andrew Huberman's. I know that.
That is crazy. If you think about it, like Andrew Huberman and Peter Attia have a bigger impact on, let's say, the people that want to be educated on this stuff in America have a bigger
Yeah.
they have a bigger influence on them versus anyone else. And it's funny because on the other side, it's not like looked at negatively. Usually, when people get a position of influence, they get pushed down, right? Or positively or negatively in that regard, they get cancelled or taken off Twitter or taken off different platforms. But for these people, their message has been largely elevated. It gets some kickback for sure, but for the most part, it's net positive.
And it's hard to imagine, those are the people who actively seek out the information, who
Mm.
say like, I want to find out the truth about how to sleep better or how to be more healthy, but like, what are all the people hearing who aren't actively seeking the truth and are just eating what's fed to them through whatever they're paying attention to, the Facebook algorithm, cable news, official channels, whatever. I'm not like a huge conspiracy theorist or anything, but like, you've got to consider all of the people. There's 300 million, 297 million people that aren't listening to Andrew Huberman in America, and like, what is the health information that they're receiving, and what decisions are they making based on that? Um, and that's not to say 300 million people should be listening to Andrew Huberman, but like, who is the most right, and what is the information that they're getting, and how does that compare to what is untrue but popular, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, it's like the sunning your balls equivalent, right? It's like you just go back to that because it just trends on Twitter as a result. Whereas Peter
yeah,
Attia, I think he spent was it like 7 to 8 years studying his first book, like doing the research for it, which is a combination of his practical as a doctor. It was something like absolutely wild. Anyway, it was like his very first Rogan interview. He'd spent like 3 years at that period, and it was like another couple of years from there, and then his latest book came out. So I just thought it was quite interesting how like he's devoted his entire life to it. He looks young and healthy, and he's great relationships. He's apparently a very nice guy, very like kind to people and everything. And that was quite funny, right? So it's like often a lot of the time you have to seek out your own truth, and then seeking your own truth leads to these better lifestyle decisions.
yeah.
And I want to say a massive thank you. This was a great, great session. I really appreciate everything. I feel like we could have went on for could go on for much longer, many different elements of the book. I'd love to, extend platform in the future if you'd ever like to come back on for the next book, which I hear you're writing. That'd be fantastic.
It's always something coming next. Appreciate it. That'd be awesome. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.